Have you ever had someone try to force you into something you never wanted, only for karma to come back around in the most unexpected way? Well, buckle up, because this is the story of how a pushy HOA Karen tried to bully me into joining her exclusive lake community, only to discover, too late, that I was actually her landlord. And trust me, she did not see it coming. Let me set the scene. I just moved into a beautiful lakeside apartment complex looking for a peaceful escape from the chaos of city life. The place was perfect, quiet, scenic, and, most importantly, not part of any homeowners association. Or so I thought. I'd always heard horror stories about HOAs, endless rules, nosy neighbors, and power-hungry board members who seemed to thrive on making life difficult for everyone else. So, when I found this apartment, I made sure to double-check. No HOA fees, no meetings, no drama. Just me, the lake, and a fresh start. But as anyone who's ever dealt with a Karen knows, peace and quiet can be hard to come by when someone's determined to run the show. It all started on a sunny Saturday morning. I was out on my balcony, enjoying a cup of coffee and the view, when I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed, clipboard in hand, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi there, I'm Karen, president of the Lakeview HOA," she announced as if she were running for office. "I wanted to personally welcome you to our community and invite you to join the HOA." I thanked her politely, but explained that my unit wasn't part of the HOA. I checked with the leasing office and my lease, no mention of any association fees or obligations. Karen's smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. "Oh, I'm sure that's just a misunderstanding. All residents are expected to join. It's for the good of the community, you know." I reiterated that I wasn't interested, and she left, but not before giving me a look that said this wasn't over. Over the next few days, Karen made it her mission to convince me. She left flyers on my door, sent emails, and even cornered me in the parking lot to talk about the benefits of joining the HOA. Each time, I politely declined, but Karen wasn't used to hearing no. She started getting more aggressive, hinting that my landscaping wasn't up to community standards, questioning whether my car was allowed in the lot, and even making comments about my guests. It was clear she saw herself as the queen bee, and I was the new drone who needed to fall in line. Things came to a head one evening when I found a formal-looking letter taped to my door. It was from the HOA, informing me that I was in violation of several community rules and owed hundreds of dollars in fines. The letter was full of legal-sounding language, but it was clear Karen was behind it. I decided enough was enough. I called the property management company to clarify, and they confirmed again that my unit was not, and never had been, part of the HOA. I was well within my rights to ignore Karen and her demands, but Karen wasn't about to let it go. The next day, she showed up at my door, furious. "You can't just ignore the rules," she snapped. "If you don't pay these fines and join the HOA, I'll have no choice but to call the police." I almost laughed. "You're going to call the cops because I won't join your club?" She glared at me. "Don't test me." Sure enough, a few hours later there was a knock at my door. 2 police officers stood there looking slightly embarrassed. "Hi, sir. We got a call about a disturbance with the HOA?" one of them asked. I explained the situation, showed them my lease and the emails from the property management company. The officers quickly realized this was a civil matter, not a criminal one, and told Karen there was nothing they could do. She was livid, but I could tell this wasn't the end. Little did Karen know, the tables were about to turn in a way she never expected, because what she didn't realize was that I wasn't just a tenant, I was also a property investor. And, as fate would have I owned several units in the complex, including the very apartment she was renting, but I'll get to that in a moment. The days after the police visit were tense. Karen's glare followed me everywhere, at the mailbox, in the parking lot, even when I was just taking out the trash. She'd whispered to other residents, shooting me dirty looks, as if I were some kind of criminal. I could feel the tension in the air every time I walked by, but honestly, I was more amused than intimidated. I'd dealt with difficult people before, but Karen was in a league of her own. What she didn't know was that I'd been quietly investing in real estate for years. I'd started small, buying a couple of rental properties in college towns, then gradually expanded into multi-unit complexes. This lakeside property was my latest acquisition, a mix of owner-occupied condos and rental units. I'd bought several apartments in the building, including, as luck would have it, the one Karen was renting. She'd moved in just a few months before I did, and her lease was managed by the same property company that handled my other units. I hadn't met all my tenants yet, but I'd seen her name on the paperwork, Karen Smith. At first, I didn't connect the dots, but after our run-ins, I double-checked the records. Sure enough, the Karen who was harassing me was the same Karen who paid rent to my LLC every month. The irony was almost too good to be true. I decided to play it cool. There was no need to escalate things yet, but I started documenting everything. Every note she left, every email, every time she tried to confront me in public. I even set up a security camera by my door, just in case. I wanted a clear record of her harassment, not just for my own protection, but because I had a feeling this was going to come in handy. Meanwhile, Karen's campaign against me ramped up. She started rallying other HOA members, trying to turn them against me. I'd overhear her at the pool, loudly complaining about certain people who refused to follow the rules. She'd send out group emails, CCing the entire community, warning about the dangers of non-members. It was almost comical how seriously she took her self-appointed role as HOA enforcer, but the more she pushed, the more isolated she became. Most of the residents just wanted to enjoy their homes in peace. They didn't care about HOA politics, and they definitely didn't want to get dragged into a personal vendetta. A few even approached me privately, apologizing for her behavior and assuring me that not everyone felt the way she did. Still, Karen was relentless. She started nitpicking every little thing: my recycling bin placement, the color of my welcome mat, even the way I parked my car. She'd take photos and send them to the property manager, demanding action. Each time, the manager would politely remind her that my unit wasn't under HOA jurisdiction, but Karen wouldn't let it go. One afternoon, I got a call from the property management office. The manager sounded exasperated. "I'm so sorry to bother you again, but Karen has filed another complaint. She's insisting that you're violating HOA rules and wants us to take action." I laughed. "You know my unit isn't part of the HOA, right?" She sighed. "Yes, we've told her that repeatedly, but she's very persistent. We're documenting everything on our end, but if you ever feel threatened, please let us know." I thanked her and hung up, shaking my head. Karen was nothing if not determined, but she was about to learn a lesson in humility. The next week, I received a notice from the HOA, another attempt to fine me for violations. This time, they threatened legal action if I didn't comply. I decided it was time to respond. I drafted a formal letter, attaching copies of my lease, the property deed, and correspondence from the management company confirming my exemption from the HOA. I CC'd the HOA board, the property manager, and, of course, Karen. In the letter, I politely but firmly stated that any further attempts to harass or intimidate me would be considered harassment, and that I reserved the right to take legal action if it continued. I also mentioned that I was aware of my rights as both a resident and a property owner. The response was immediate. The HOA president, not Karen, thankfully, replied, apologizing for the confusion and assuring me that no further action would be taken. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She cornered me in the parking lot the next day, fuming. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she spat. "Just because you found a loophole doesn't mean you're above the rules." I smiled. "I'm just following the law, Karen. Maybe you should try it sometime." She stormed off, muttering under her breath. I could tell she was plotting her next move. What Karen didn't realize was that her lease was up for renewal in a few months. As her landlord, I had every right to decide whether or not to renew it. I'd been a fair and reasonable landlord to all my tenants, but Karen's behavior was making me seriously reconsider. I started reviewing her file, late rent, payments, noise complaints from neighbors, and now, a documented pattern of harassment against another resident, me. It was more than enough to justify not renewing her lease, but I wanted to handle it professionally. I consulted with my attorney, who confirmed that I was well within my rights to issue a non-renewal notice, provided I followed all the proper procedures. As the renewal date approached, Karen's behavior grew even more erratic. She seemed to sense that something was up, but she had no idea just how much power I actually had in this situation. The day finally came when I had to make a decision about Karen's lease. I sat at my desk, her file open in front of me, and thought about everything that had happened over the past few months. I wasn't someone who enjoyed confrontation, but I also believed in standing up for myself and for the other residents who just wanted to live in peace. Karen's actions had crossed the line from annoying to outright hostile, and I knew I couldn't let it continue. I drafted a formal notice of non-renewal, citing her repeated violations of the lease agreement, her harassment of other residents, and her failure to maintain a respectful relationship with property management. I made sure the language was clear, professional, and legally sound. I wasn't out for revenge. I just wanted to restore some sanity to the community. When the notice was ready, I delivered it to her apartment in person. I knocked on her door, and when she opened it, her expression shifted from surprise to suspicion in an instant. "What do you want?" she snapped, arms crossed. "I'm here in my capacity as your landlord," I said calmly, handing her the envelope. "This is your official notice of non-renewal. Your lease will expire at the end of the term, and you'll need to vacate the unit by that date." She stared at the envelope, then back at me, her face turning red. "You can't do this. I have rights. I'll take you to court." "You're welcome to consult an attorney," I replied, keeping my tone even. "But the decision is final. You violated the terms of your lease, and I have every right not to renew." She slammed the door in my face, and I could hear her shouting inside. I walked away, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. I knew she wouldn't go quietly, but I also knew I'd done everything by the book. Over the next few weeks, Karen's behavior became even more unpredictable. She started spreading rumors about me, telling anyone who would listen that I was a slumlord and that I was evicting her out of spite. She even tried to rally the HOA board to intervene, but they wanted nothing to do with her drama. Most of the residents were relieved to see someone finally standing up to her. One afternoon, I got a call from the property manager. "Karen's been calling the office non-stop, demanding we reverse your decision," she said, sounding exhausted. "She's even threatened to sue the HOA if they don't force you to renew her lease." I chuckled. "The HOA has no authority over my rental decisions. She's just grasping at straws." "Exactly," the manager agreed. "We're documenting everything, but let us know if you need any support." I appreciated the backup. I knew Karen was trying to intimidate me, but I wasn't about to back down. I'd dealt with difficult tenants before, but none quite like her. As her move-out date approached, Karen's desperation grew. She started leaving nasty notes on my door, accusing me of discrimination and threatening to expose me online. I kept every note, every email, every voicemail, just in case. I wasn't worried about her threats, but I wanted to be prepared for anything. Then, about 2 weeks before her lease was up, Karen made one last-ditch effort to get her way. She showed up at my door, this time with a completely different attitude. Gone was the hostility. Instead, she tried to play the victim. "Look, I know we've had our differences," she began, her voice trembling, "but I really need this place. I can't afford to move right now. Isn't there anything we can work out?" I listened patiently, but I didn't waver. "Karen, I'm sorry, but the decision stands. You've made things very difficult for everyone here, and I have to think about the well-being of the community. She tried to argue, but I stood firm. Eventually, she left, slamming the door behind her. I could tell she was furious, but there was nothing more she could do. The day of her move-out finally arrived. I did a walkthrough of the apartment with the property manager, documenting the condition of the unit. Karen glared at me the entire time, but she didn't say a word. When everything was finished, she handed over the keys and stormed out, muttering under her breath. As soon as she was gone, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. The atmosphere in the building changed almost overnight. Neighbors who had avoided the common areas started coming out again. People smiled and greeted each other in the hallways. It was as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. I took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. Karen had tried to use her position in the HOA to bully and intimidate me, but in the end, her own actions had been her downfall. She'd underestimated me, assuming I was just another tenant she could push around. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. Word started to spread around the community about what had happened. Some people were shocked to learn that I was actually Karen's landlord. Others just laughed, saying it was about time someone put her in her place. I didn't go out of my way to brag about it, but I didn't hide the truth either. If people asked, I told them the story, minus the petty details. The best part was seeing the positive changes in the community. Without Karen stirring up trouble, people felt more comfortable and relaxed. The HOA meetings became less contentious, and the property manager even thanked me for handling the situation so professionally. With Karen finally gone, life at the lakeside complex settled into a new, much more peaceful rhythm. I could finally enjoy my mornings on the balcony without feeling like I was being watched or judged. The neighbors, who had once kept to themselves, started to open up, and a sense of community began to blossom. It was almost as if everyone had been holding their breath, waiting for the storm to pass, and now they could finally relax. I started getting to know some of the other residents better. There was Mrs. Thompson, who had lived in the building for over 20 years and knew everyone's business, but in a friendly, grandmotherly way. She baked cookies for the whole floor the week after Karen moved out, joking that it was a celebration of peace. Then there was Mark, a single dad who worked nights and had always avoided HOA meetings because he didn't have the energy for drama. He thanked me for standing up to Karen, saying it was the first time he'd felt comfortable letting his kids play outside. The property manager, too, seemed relieved. She told me that complaints and calls to the office had dropped by more than half since Karen's departure. "It's like night and day," she said. "You have no idea how much stress you've saved us." I realized that while I'd initially just wanted to protect myself, my actions had actually helped a lot of people. It was a good feeling, knowing that I'd made a positive difference in the community. I started thinking about ways to keep that momentum going. Maybe I could organize a community barbecue or a lake cleanup day, something to bring people together for the right reasons. But even as things improved, I couldn't help but reflect on the lessons I'd learned from the whole ordeal. For one, I'd seen firsthand how a single person's toxic behavior could impact an entire community. Karen had wielded her HOA title like a weapon, using it to intimidate and control others. But in the end, her lack of empathy and respect for her neighbors had been her undoing. I also learned the importance of knowing your rights and standing your ground. If I hadn't done my homework, reading my lease, checking the property records, and documenting everything, Karen might have succeeded in bullying me into joining the HOA or paying bogus fines. Instead, I was able to protect myself and, ultimately, turn the tables. There was also a certain irony in the fact that Karen, who had tried so hard to control everyone else, had been living in a unit owned by the very person she was targeting. It was a twist worthy of a sitcom, and I couldn't help but chuckle every time I thought about it. Sometimes life really does have a sense of humor. A few weeks after Karen moved out, I got a letter in the mail. It was from her. At first, I considered tossing it in the trash, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it and found a single. sheet of paper covered in angry, scrawled handwriting. She accused me of ruining her life, of conspiring against her, and of being the worst landlord in history. She threatened to leave bad reviews online and warn other tenants about me. I read the letter, then set it aside. I wasn't worried. I knew my reputation as a landlord was solid, and I had plenty of happy tenants who could vouch for me. Besides, anyone who took the time to read her rant would probably see it for what it was, a last, desperate attempt to lash out after losing control. Instead of letting it get to me, I focused on the positive. I reached out to the property manager and asked if there were any residents who needed help with repairs or maintenance. I offered to sponsor a small community event, just to bring people together and show that not all landlords or HOA members were out to make life difficult. The event was a hit. We set up a few tables by the lake, grilled some burgers and hot dogs, and let the kids run wild. People laughed, shared stories, and, for the first time in a long while, really seemed to enjoy each other's company. Several residents came up to me and thanked me for everything I'd done. One even joked, "You should run for HOA president." I laughed and politely declined, saying I was happy to leave the politics to someone else. As the sun set over the lake, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not just because I'd stood up to Karen, but because I'd helped create a better environment for everyone. It was a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about looking out for your neighbors too. Of course, I knew there would always be challenges. No community is perfect, and there would always be disagreements and conflicts to navigate. But I felt more confident than ever in my ability to handle whatever came my way. I'd face down the ultimate HOA Karen and come out stronger for it. Looking back, I realized that the whole experience had taught me more than I ever expected. I'd learned about resilience, about the importance of community, and about the power of standing up for what's right. And, maybe most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to let their own actions speak for themselves. As the weeks turned into months, the story of Karen's downfall became something of a legend around the complex. New residents would hear whispers about the HOA president who got evicted by her own landlord, and longtime tenants would share the tale with a mix of relief and amusement. It was the kind of story that brought people together, a shared experience that everyone could laugh about now that the dust had settled. I noticed that the overall atmosphere in the building had changed for the better. People were more willing to help each other out, whether it was lending a hand with groceries or organizing small get-togethers by the lake. The sense of community that had been missing for so long was finally starting to take root. Even the HOA, now under new leadership, seemed to have learned a lesson. The new president, a soft-spoken retired teacher named Linda, made it clear that the association's job was to support residents, not control them. She reached out to me personally, thanking me for my patience and professionalism during the whole ordeal. Linda and I had a few conversations about how to make the HOA more transparent and approachable. She asked for my input on new policies, and I suggested things like open forums, regular surveys, and a clear process for handling complaints. It was refreshing to see someone in charge who actually listened and cared about the residents' well-being. I realized that, while I'd started out as an outsider, I'd become an important part of the community. One afternoon, as I was walking by the lake, I ran into Mark and his kids. They were fishing off the dock, and he waved me over. "Hey, you want to join us?" he asked, holding out an extra fishing rod. I smiled and accepted, grateful for the chance to relax and enjoy the simple pleasures of lakeside living. As we sat there watching the sun glint off the water, Mark turned to me and said, "You know, things are a lot better around here since you stood up to Karen. People feel safer. We owe you one." I shrugged, a little embarrassed by the praise. "I just did what anyone would do," I replied. But deep down, I knew that wasn't entirely true. Not everyone would have had the resources or the resolve to take on someone like Karen. It took a combination of preparation, patience, and a willingness to stand firm in the face of intimidation. That evening, I reflected on how much I'd grown through the experience. I'd always considered myself a fair landlord, but dealing with Karen had forced me to become even more diligent and proactive. I made it a point to check in with my tenants regularly, making sure they felt heard and respected. I also started attending HOA meetings not as a member, but as a concerned property owner who wanted to stay informed and involved. The more I participated, the more I realized how important it was for landlords and tenants to have a voice in community matters. Too often, decisions were made behind closed doors with little input from the people who were actually affected. By showing up and speaking out, I hoped to encourage others to do the same. Of course, not everything was perfect. There were still occasional disagreements and minor disputes, but they were handled with a level of civility and respect that had been missing before. The new HOA board was committed to fairness and transparency, and the property manager was more responsive than ever. It felt like a fresh start for everyone. One day, I received an email from a former tenant who had moved out shortly after Karen's reign of terror began. She'd heard about what happened and wanted to thank me for standing up to the bullying. "I wish I'd had the courage to do what you did," she wrote. "You made a real difference." Her words stuck with me. It was easy to underestimate the impact one person could have, but the truth was, standing up for yourself could inspire others to do the same. I realized that, in a way, Karen had done me a favor. She'd forced me to become a better landlord, a more engaged neighbor, and a stronger advocate for my community. As summer turned to fall, I found myself looking forward to the future. The complex was thriving, and I was proud to be a part of it. I even started looking for new investment opportunities, confident that I could handle whatever challenges came my way. The experience with Karen had taught me to trust my instincts, do my homework, and never back down from doing what was right. Every now and then, I'd hear a story about another HOA Karen causing trouble in a different neighborhood, and I'd smile to myself. I knew firsthand how difficult those situations could be, but I also knew that with the right approach, even the most persistent bully could be dealt with. It was all about staying calm, being prepared, and never letting fear dictate your actions. Looking back, I wouldn't have changed a thing. The ordeal had been stressful, sure, but it had also been a turning point, not just for me, but for the entire community. We'd come together, learned from our mistakes, and emerged stronger on the other side. And as I watched the sun set over the lake, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought us all closer together. As time went on, the story of Karen faded into the background, becoming just another chapter in the history of our lakeside community. New faces moved in, bringing fresh energy and ideas, while longtime residents settled into a comfortable routine. The complex had weathered its storm, and now it was thriving in ways I hadn't imagined when I first moved in. I found myself reflecting often on how a single person's actions, good or bad, could ripple out and affect so many others. Karen's attempts to control and intimidate had created tension and fear, but her departure had opened the door for healing and growth. It was a powerful reminder that standing up to bullies isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting the community as a whole. One evening, as I walked along the lake, I ran into Linda, the new HOA president. She was chatting with a group of residents, laughing and listening to their suggestions for the next community event. She waved me over and introduced me to a couple who had just moved in. "This is the guy who helped turn things around here," she said with a smile. I shook their hands, feeling a sense of pride and belonging that I hadn't felt in a long time. Afterward, Linda pulled me aside. "I just wanted to thank you again," she said. "You could have just ignored the situation, but you chose to get involved. That made all the difference." Her words meant a lot. I realized that, while I'd started out just wanting to avoid HOA drama, I'd ended up helping to create a place where people genuinely cared about each other. It wasn't about power or control, it was about respect, fairness, and community. Also thought about Karen. I wondered if she'd learned anything from the experience, or if she'd just moved on to another neighborhood, ready to start the cycle all over again. Part of me hoped she'd take the opportunity to reflect and change, but I knew that wasn't something I could control. What mattered was that I'd handled the situation with integrity and professionalism, and that the community was better off for it. As the seasons changed and the leaves turned gold and red, I felt a renewed sense of optimism. I continued to invest in the property, making improvements and encouraging residents to take pride in their homes. The lake became a gathering place for everyone, kids playing, families picnicking, neighbors chatting as the sun set. It was everything I'd hoped for when I first moved in, and more. In the end, the lesson was clear. Never underestimate the power of standing your ground, especially when you're in the right. And never forget that sometimes the best way to deal with a Karen is to let her write her own ending while you focus on building something better for everyone else.